Brilliant. Thank you so much. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Aisha. So, afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being in this space with us. And thank you to EIDA for having myself and others in this space. So today is all about thinking about why this no one size fits approach to domestic abuse kind of does work. So we're going to be thinking about how different people have different needs, depending on their experiences, their characteristics, but also, really importantly, their individual circumstances. And this is why it is so important to think about this intersectional lens. What does that actually mean? Where does it come from? And how we can implement it, and how to think about it when we're supporting those experiencing domestic abuse. So just to remind everyone, the webinar is going to be hosted by myself. I'm Meena Kumari. I'm an advisory member, a part of EIDA's council, as well as the director and founder of HOPE Training and Consultancy. I'm now going to ask our panel members to introduce themselves, and I'm going to ask Sandra Pollock to please go first.
Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. And somehow I knew Meena was going to pick on me first, but there you go. I'm Sandra Pollock, and in my real life, I am a consultant for leadership management, organizational change, diversity, and inclusion. And I work with senior decision makers across all sectors to look at the issues of diversity and inclusion, and how leaders make decisions and filter down the right information to help their organizations support both their individuals working within the organization, but also how we give the right messages out to our clients and the people we support. So that in a nutshell. In addition, I also have the pleasure of sitting on the EIDA advisory panel, along with EDI roles, sorry, NED. I have dyslexia. I say this all the time. So I get all of my numbers and my figures all mixed up, but I get around to it. But I sit on a number of boards to support leadership and diversity as well. So that's it for now.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sandra. Bridie, let's come to you next, please.
Thanks, Meena. My name is Bridie Anderson. I'm an independent trainer and consultant, former police officer. So I served across 2 different forces, Hertfordshire and Surrey, and specialised the last 8 years of my service as the force advisor in public protection for domestic abuse and stalking. Now I'm an independent domestic homicide review chair, or domestic abuse related death review chair. I also work as a part-time services manager at an IDFA and outreach service in Surrey, and have a few kind of various roles providing support and advice, but a large proportion of my work recently has been surrounding police perpetrated domestic abuse. I'm here today speaking to you from a personal experience around disability, though, so that's what I'll be bringing to this session on intersection.
Thank you so much, Bridie. And for those who are not aware, you can put your introduction in the chat. So if you do want to tell the group who you are and where you work, please do. And David, please, let's come to yourself.
Yes, I'm David Chan. I'm a child survivor of domestic abuse. I'm also an intimate male survivor, intimate partner abuse from male. I'm a domestic abuse campaigner. I sit on the advisory board for the Domestic Abuse Commission of England and Wales. I don't do this full time, but I try to do what I can to create awareness for everyone's experiences of domestic abuse. I'm a male, I'm a child, so that's the centre point from which I'm speaking today.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, David. So thank you so much to kind of our panel, just introducing themselves, telling the group who they are as well, and you'll be hearing from them as we go through the session. Just to remind everyone, we do have a function on Zoom where you can post questions. As I'm asking the panel questions, if you want to do follow-up questions, please just put it in that chat box, and I will be grouping the questions before we finish today, and I'll try and get through as many as possible for you as well. So the first question, I'm going to come to you, Sandra, if that's okay. And I'm not picking on you because I feel like I keep coming to you first. But the first question, Sandra, that I'd like to ask you is, can you tell us about intersectionality as a concept, the history, how it was founded, how it came about, and the origins of intersectionality, please?
Right. Okay, no problem picking on me first. That's all right. So intersectionality clearly is a word that has just, blown up recently, both across, social media and within organizations. So where did it come from? Well, the term intersectionality was coined by Black feminist and legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw as a metaphor to describe, I think she had written a couple of papers around this, which can be found, but it's a metaphor to describe the way in which multiple forms of inequality or advantage sometimes compound to create obstacles for an individual in particular, and also for a group. And her thinking behind that is because we don't see the let me just, after that, let me just go back. So in organizations, we tend to focus on one particular area. So if we're wanting to change things around race or disability, we will look at creating policies and procedures that focus on those particular areas at a time. And many times when we're doing programs within organizations, we will have a program for disability, a program for race, a program for, gender issues and that sort of stuff. So what Kimberly Crenshaw wanted us to realize is that an individual doesn't live separate lives in these areas. So this term intersectionality brings our attention to the connectiveness, the impact of how these different disadvantages or inequalities all come together at the same time. They're happening at the same time in an individual's life. And that may vary. So, for example, if someone's dealing with ageism, they may also be dealing with racism at the same time, or healthcare issues at the same time, or abuse issues at the time. But as leaders and managers, we may only realize or think about one particular area. Well, actually, the fact that they're dealing with all of these areas all at the same time, these things intersect, they connect together, which causes a lot more issues for the individual or the group than just looking at the one thing. So intersectionality is the connection of all the different experiences an individual may have or be having as we are looking at maybe one issue. So if I can quickly take a quote from Audre Lorde, for example, and she says, there is no such thing as a single struggle issue, because we don't live in single issue lives. So intersectionality is really to bring us to the awareness that when we are looking at one area of an individual's lives, there's lots more things that we need to become more aware of. And really, a lot of my work is around bringing that awareness to leaders and decision makers. Does that sort of answer your question?
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Sandra. Thanks for kind of starting us off and kind of just giving us a bit of an overview of where it comes from, but also this notion of intersecting different identities and linking to levels of oppression as well. Bridie, can I come to you, please? And kind of what I want to ask you, and you mentioned it already in your introduction, you said you were going to come today at quite a personal stance of thinking about disability. When we think about intersectionality at work, so within the workplace, what are some of the things do you think that employers need to think of when we think about that lens that Sandra's just been talking about?
Thanks, Meena. I think first and foremost, everyone, employee, employer, has to consider things from an individual level upwards. What we tend to do is we try and write policy, write agreements, put in place something in order to protect everyone, which is great at the heart of it. The tendency that I see a lot of employers kind of doing with that is forgetting the individuality and the idiosyncrasies that come with individuals. And I think in terms of intersectionality, particularly disability, from my own personal experiences, you have a tendency to tar people with the same brush, assume that one size fits all. Just like Sandra is kind of explaining, you might treat someone as a disabled employee and forget that actually they're a person of colour, or that they have different background, their first language isn't English, they're neurodiverse, they're going through the menopause or they're perimenopausal. What does that mean for that individual? So I think the basis of everything, it has to start from individualized kind of service provision and asking that person. Again, we have a tendency to forget to ask the individual, and I experienced it a lot. I was in my role for many years wrapped in cotton wool. I knew intention was good. I knew it was a protective action, but it was incredibly frustrating because what was effectively happening to me was further disabling, and I wanted to be enabled. I wanted my strengths to be seen, and for those areas that my disability impacted to be supported, like held up, rather than actually just kind of a white wash of, you're off front line, you need to be kept safe, we need to do this. And actually some of the things I needed was just access to a disabled toilet, a little bit more time in the toilet than other people might have, and not being judged. I was very harsh on myself, like I've got to be at my desk, I've got to be doing work, and actually I might need to spend 40 minutes in the toilet flushing through my medication tube. The impression that that gave people, that I was never at my desk, that for me was the biggest issue. Actually, I don't want people to think that I'm like not working or being less present as an employee. So again, you'd never know that unless you'd ask me personally. So creating space and time for supervision where your employees can feel able to talk about things like that, it's really important. Not just assuming that, oh, we've got a disability policy or we've got a domestic abuse policy. What about when they interact? How might my perpetrator be targeting me because of my disabilities? And therefore, how much more important is the way that I'm seen by my colleagues, peers and supervisors mean in the workplace. So yeah, I think it's really important that we always look at the individual, start there and work outwards, and just time, respect and a space to listen. When you're not on your phone, you're not on your computer, we're all really busy. I do get that. But actually looking down, shutting your laptop and being present in some of those supervision sessions is what I found, because I would look for an inspector or a staff member that I could trust, and that's built up over me observing. How do they speak about people? How do they treat people? Are they challenging discriminatory or derogatory behaviour? Because if they're not, then I don't feel safe with them. It's about being a safe person. Are you championing what it says in that policy? Because again, you could have the best worded policy, the most articulate Gucci policy, but if I'm not seeing it enacted by the way that you're living day to day at work, it's not going to speak to me as being meaningful or authentic. So I think that's really important, that there isn't a disconnect between what we're going to say we're going to do as an organisation and what we're actually living through our staff and management down.
Yeah, it's really, really important. And actually what you're really emphasizing on for a lot of employers and employees that might be in this room, sorry, is this notion of safe spaces, which, you know, ironically, Kimberly Crenshaw has written a lot about in her work. And that is thinking about those lenses that we're looking through when we are supporting other individuals. David, if I can come to you, please. I'm just thinking about something that you said in your introduction around your own lived experience, whether it was as a child or whether as a kind of as an adult male who's experienced domestic abuse. One of the things that we do know is, of course, men and boys will experience domestic abuse, and the response to male survivors needs to be absolutely spot on, and times it's not. What more can employers do when we're thinking about men who are impacted by domestic abuse?
Yeah, so I mean, I can kind of talk to this very real in that I have, you know, experienced this with my employer. I'm a male victim of domestic abuse, or a previous employer, and so for me that means seeing, you know, male survivors, seeing myself in the images and conversations around that. Otherwise, I would just out of the box not identify with that. It removes your experiences. You know, if 1 in 6 men are going to experience domestic abuse in a lifetime, you know, there needs to be an awareness to the need to recognise their experiences so that they can obviously reach out and report, but also offer the provisions that are quite severely under lacking in terms of society today. So in terms of what I would hope to expect from an employer, is really championing, as we were saying, you know, survivor stories. They remain at the heart of this being seen. It's one of the most impactful things that you can do, is including a male survivor's voice and stories, and that they can see and recognise themselves, because very often, more often than not, it's about putting a thread and asking the right questions, and employers can't do that without a victim or survivor wanting to disclose if that's what they want to choose to do. And so I think a really quite actionable way is to kind of create that awareness for a victim or survivor who's working in your company, to be able to ask that within themselves, and the awareness that you're putting out towards them. It's like, is that me? I think that's a very visceral, almond thing that you give a victim or survivor. It's definitely helped me, my mother, who was a victim of domestic abuse, until you come upon them a mirror image, or a similar mirror image of what you are going through. Only then it will kind of put at the thread that there's more to this, and then it will start you in the next steps to kind of look at that outreach and support. I mean, there are, active days where you can do this now, or, a very new day is obviously the Supporting Male Victims Domestic Abuse Day. That's 15th of November. That's a great rally point. It's creating rally points as well. It's National Men's Day. And also it's about looking at the culture within your office. I mean, constructively dismantling and kind of disrupting negative male stereotypes is really something I think is important. This idea that men shouldn't be emotional, they need to be strong, it's anti-feminine, they need to be real men. This whole kind of, those behaviours really serve as a barrier for men seeking support, and can be quite exclusionary, and lead to depression as well in terms of delivering emotional pain. So I often think about ways of tackling that in a constructive way, because obviously it's a lot of lightning rod discussions always in society and culture, in perhaps avoiding terms like toxic masculinity, but recognising terms that there are harmful masculinities and harmful expressions that men and women put men in boxes to respond in terms of societal places, and how those the man box is real, and that we are born into it, and how if we discuss and allow men to be vulnerable in a working culture, in a working place, and an open office, that they don't feel as if they need to rise to certain forms of behaviour, that they can be vulnerable, they can reach out, and that maybe your line manager isn't one of these men or women that wants to put you on that place in society. And I think it's just looking at everyone empathetically for their own experiences, that were born into the world as just being another human being that is capable and of doling out and also receiving abuse. And so I feel that's really important to engage. There are lots of barriers to men seeking support, with obviously like the lack of provision I talked about, which is why it's even more important for us to deliver that awareness of what support is out there. The Respect charity, Men's Advice Line, Mankind Initiative, they are all their specialist support services, and that's why it's really important to bang the drum in awareness of those services, because it's severely more limited. Obviously it's limited as a whole in what services are out there. I think that's understandable, but especially when we talk about intersectionality and lesser seen victims and survivors of domestic abuse, it's really imperative that we reaffirm that you are seen, you are heard, and here are the support services, and really keeping male victims in the language and discussion of domestic abuse, because it is a constant discussion, and these awareness doesn't just exist around key rally points and days of the year. It's always a constant discussion. So there's many things you can do, and I think it's a great positivity to understanding that work.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, David. I mean, there's so much there, isn't there, really, to unpack when we think about what you've just said, what Sandra said, and what Bridie said. But actually, what's really clear and what's coming through is this notion of representation. And actually, you might have a male victim that works in your service, but that male victim may also be a Black man who's never disclosed domestic abuse. There may be a gay man, it might be a man with a disability, there might be an older man who's never disclosed the domestic abuse. And what does it mean in taking that approach, because their needs or their levels of oppression might be slightly different to someone else's. And I think that's kind of the key thing that Sandra was explaining when she was thinking about where this theory's come from and Kimberly Crenshaw's work. Sandra, I'm going to come back to you if that's okay, because one of the key things that's been coming out is this notion of leadership. Because what Bridie and David were saying is, look, there's something about safe spaces, there's something about leaders being better aware, being understood, something about the company culture. So how do you embed intersectionality into that culture? So when we think about understanding and awareness of intersectionality for leaders or those that are holding that level of power, how can we support employers? What more can they do to kind of equip themselves to think about those equitable, not equality, but equitable, diverse and inclusive cultural spaces where everyone feels valued and respected? So I just want you to kind of just talk us through maybe some of the work that you might have done with leaders in that space. Thank you, Sandra.
You're welcome. Yeah, really, really good question. And one of the things that I would say in starting to respond to this question is that, like all change, and this is change, this is why I always put, in there change management, because in all of these things, it's about change. And you have individual change, you have cultural change. And in terms of leadership, unless the leaders are a part of that change and lead in being honest about where they are, being honest about what they're learning, being honest about recognizing their own biases, which as a leader will impact in the organization, that change is going to be much slower. It is a journey, and unfortunately, change is slow. Whether we like it or not, it is slow. So I think everything starts with the leaders taking responsibility. So leadership, we know, can happen from anywhere. But if you're responsible for a group of people, so let's look at the most general term of leadership. If you're managing a group, you have some responsibility to lead that group. If you're managing a team, you have that role within that team. And if you're managing an organization, yes, you have a role. So I think where we do need to start, and I can't remember if it was Bridie or David who brought in the need for individual responsibility. So every leader needs to start with him or herself. And how an organization can push that is in the processes and policies and expectation of culture that they embed. So it's about values. And I think it was David said, not just talking about it, but actioning the values. Bridie, what do I see in terms of the behaviors? So that's where it starts. Yes, we need policies. Yes, we need procedures, but it is the behaviors. And sometimes what's missing is that the expected behaviors are not outlined by the organization. They just have a policy. And if we can connect the values with the behaviors in bringing about this change approach, then we can look at our leaders and hold them accountable for recognizing their biases. Let's put our hands up. Every single human being has biases, and those biases come to us through our education, culture, parenting, society, you name it. So within our society, there is an expectation. Let's go back to David. Picking on you now, David. Let's go back to how men are expected to behave, not show emotion, just man up, all of these sorts of terms. In an organization, we can create an environment. And I actually had one of my questions here was, how easy is it for a man in your organization to register his experiences, whether it's abusive, whether it's bullying, whatever the case is? And, we can find that out if we're bold enough to gather information. How can we do this? Go back to safe spaces. Some organizations are not yet in the place where they can create a safe space. So some of the things that I do with some organizations, I facilitate group conversations that are safe spaces or individual one-to-one conversations where people can talk about the issues that they've recognized within their own life and their own biases, and they can get some support to deal with those. We can discuss these things in groups, but also I do work with the leadership and board level where, because I'm an independent person, and I'm not just saying this because this is my work, I'm saying this because I can see the difference it makes. Sometimes organizations need somebody outside of themselves so that person can help them to see their blind spots. So it's about creating that culture, but sometimes creating that culture means breaking down and recognizing what exists already, where the failures are, and creating a space where people can be honest about what they've experienced already and how they're not being treated in an intersectional way. And that's the only way we're going to change our culture, by being prepared to look at what we've got already. And from that, develop things that work. Bridie mentioned, I think it was you, Bridie, that mentioned asking people. You can't change without being open to hearing, and being open to hearing and doing something with it. Now, you will get some, well, actually, if you want to change, I want to earn £1 million, a week. That's not practical. But if we talk about, we're honest about where we are, and we together, when I say we together, leadership and everybody else in the organization have an honest conversations. A lot of the work that I do is about going in and having those honest, confidential conversations, and then coming up with, the main points from that discussion, and helping organizations create change, put the steps in place to create a more psychologically safe environment, a more open environment, a more honest environment, and it's connected with behaviors that people want to see, so that if they don't see those behaviors, they see opposite behaviors. It's a safe space to say, actually, do you know something? You said this the other day, and this was the impact on me. How can we talk about that? So there's a lot in there, and there's a lot more, but I hope that begins to paint a picture.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sandra. I mean, there's so much there, isn't there, really? And we could talk about this way longer than an hour. But there's something about psychological safety within leadership, within employment as well. David, before I come back to you with thinking about what more can employers do, Bridie, I want to come back to what you said something earlier about disability within the workplace, or neurodiversity. So thinking about neurodiversity as well. And again, a lot of employers are becoming a lot more aware of domestic abuse. People potentially are talking about it at work. We spend a lot of time at work, don't we? We spend a lot of time with our colleagues. Give us some examples of some of the things that you're either seeing in training, or you've seen kind of in your frontline experience, where, where you have seen it work, where people have taken domestic abuse disclosures into work, and they are thinking, actually, my employer has created this safe space. My colleague has been able to do the following for me.
Thanks, Meena. Yeah, and I'm seeing more of those examples, which is really good. So in terms of disclosures in the workplace, always really hard. Sandra talks about the glacial pace of change, and we are seeing that with the culture around domestic abuse generally, moving from a private matter behind closed doors, a taboo, to now getting spoken about more. Same with mental ill health. That was very much a don't go there, don't disclose, particularly in areas like the military and policing. You're seen as less than. You daren't disclose certain things. Again, that stigma and those really unhelpful, incorrect kind of fallacies around it all are dispersing, but they're still there. Even if they're not there in an organisation, people with that experience, so with the intersecting identities of disability, maybe that have experienced homophobia or racism, any level of oppression is going to make them more scared. When you have visible messaging, and I'm talking literally like old school, a poster up that talks about intersectionality, that talks about male survivors of domestic abuse, that talks about, do you have neurodiversity, you need some help, we can give you screens, we can give you this. In the organisation, one of the organisations I work in now, our staff have neurodiversity. So again, we're not shy about that. We talk about it and make environment's inclusive. I think as employers, or people that work employing people, whether that be in a charity, contractors, we just need to be able to say, look, we represent society. We're just a slice through it all. We're not better than, we're not other than, we're not different to. We're all humans. None of us are infallible. And the better educated we can get, Sandra touched on it, it's about education. And again, she mentioned it's that starting point of reflecting internally. Like, we all love to think that we're not biased, that we don't hold biases. We do, and a lot of them are subconscious, and it's about constantly checking in, reflecting. You can't do that unless you have people to talk to you. You know, I talk to you a lot, Meena. I always ask you questions, is this the right language? Should I use that? Am I thinking of this wrong? To have the ability to do that's really important. So I think what workplaces can do to help that is engage. Because when you have that, people then not only feel safe to make those disclosures and say, look, you treat me well, like a human being, you respect me, you don't judge me. I feel safe enough now to say, actually, I'm experiencing abuse at home. We've had disclosures where the post-COVID, the norm has become working from home. That's incredibly unsafe for a lot of clients. They've been able to go back to their workplace and say, can you formally request I come back to work in the office, so that it's not me asking, because that could potentially have some quite severe negative connotations by my abuser. But if there is a directive to come back to the office 3-4 days a week, can you do that? And then working with your employers to facilitate that safe working practice is really important. And we've seen lots of successes where victims have had tailored plans of how to work, when to work, created with their employer as a safety plan for domestic abuse at home. So that's so positive. And I think, again, it can be a bit of those, I don't want to lift the rock because I don't know if I could manage what's under it. Employers have to, it's there anyway. And actually having the courage to kind of talk about things, ask questions, not just about that, but about, you know, have you experienced racism? Do you feel included in this? Is there an area that we can change or improve? Just in my own materials, my training materials, I look through them, white. All my pictures are of white people. Why is that? So, you know, I make conscious effort to make sure I'm including people that don't just look the same or look like me. People with disabilities, with missing limbs. I make sure that everything's accessible in terms of the PowerPoints I provide. For dyslexics, for people with neurodiversity. Even in our service, we will support clients in an environment that suits them. So again, we have clients, victims that might not feel safe enough to disclose to their employer, so might come to us as a specialist support service first. They can't come into our office because of that kind of sensory overload. We have neurodiverse clients. We couldn't meet them in a coffee shop in town centre because, again, sensory overload. So our workers will work with them on a bespoke level and say, actually, we'll have a meeting in the woods. We'll meet on this bench in the woods and go for a potter about, do a bit of forest bathing and talk about that, so they don't have that sensory overload, far more active engagement. Just things like that, making sure your employers have a lunch break, get away from the desk. If there's, you know, issues around that, ask why. It's about, I think all of us have this fear of encroaching onto private lives, but we have to be professionally curious. We have to have, because we have that duty of care. And with domestic abuse, if we then layer that, the intersectional issues we've talked about already, you know, this culture and gendered norms of what males should and shouldn't be, how people of colour, I've got friends who did very, very different experience of police than I did growing up in Watford, completely different worlds. The only difference between us is the colour of our skin. Understanding that, and therefore the response that gains, how I respond to things will be very different to my friend Chantel, who's a person of colour, because of those life experiences. So yes, it's about being person-centred, individualised, but understanding those areas of oppression and actively working to say, I'm aware of them, I know about this, religion, culture, calling them out, getting them spoken about, removing the stigma, has helped a lot of these kind of positive cases. That's what I've seen thematically really works in workplaces where like nothing's not able to be spoken about.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Bridie. And actually, Bridie, you said something really, really important there. I mean, a lot of important things have been said today, but just to emphasize, home isn't always safe. And actually, sometimes people go to work to be safe. And this culture of for working from home, you know, it is changing, it is evolving. I have people that contact me all the time about, I don't feel safe at home. The only safe place actually is in my office because I have got witnesses, I've got people around me if something's going on. So you've said something really, really pertinent there. David, I just want to come to you before I go to the questions that are in the chat. And I'm just going to ask you, David, is there anything else that you would really want to emphasize or to add about what more employers can do through that intersectional lens for anyone experiencing domestic abuse?
Yeah, I think we always need to think about it from a perspective of, you really just need to, it's about awareness, it's about a conversation that's always moving and is engaged in certain awareness days, and it's the fundamental building block to the work that we do, is creating awareness in society that pushes big work like this behind the scenes, and get big employers who actively see this as the next step. Post mental health awareness is caring about the safety of your employees, and investing in the people that you care about, that should be a part of the family that you work around day in, day out, and spend the majority of your lives with. So it's about really normalizing those conversations in the workplace and not treating them as like a grenade getting thrown across a desk in a one-to-one, where I viscerally felt that before. Through all my campaigning work, people in my work kind of know about it, but still, if I think I disclosed I was being stalked, every 4 years I have someone from an intimate partner relationship that kind of revisits, and it felt very stalking recently. And so I disclosed that, and it felt very much because that employer at the time didn't have a domestic abuse policy. That person was under-equipped to tackle it, although he had a professional curiosity that I think was really great to have. It's just he didn't have the skills basis to support himself and the confidence to handle that. And so I often think about, the signposting to that, whether if an HR person is not upskilled in that, it's having the central point that is a line manager or a person that has that professional curiosity to ask or put at the third, and to make sure the person feels comfortable in when they're disclosing, that you can help them feel that it is a place of support, that it isn't just a one-time conversation, it's a running conversation, and things and phases change. We all are aware that domestic abuse and early signs of coercion or stalking can lead to escalation, and I think that's really important to be aware of. And also, when directing to support, that if the support is company-based, whether it's through an internal service, that yes, that home is an abusive place, and if it's virtual, what are you doing to provide a safe space for them to interact with those services where they want to explore it? If it's an open plan office, that's not going to be the right space. If it's at home, obviously it's not the right space. Don't presume they're going to look on their phone and it's going to be fine. That could be monitored by the abuser too. So do you have a safe space in your company? If not, is that a discussion that you can kind of look forward to in the future to work towards and understand? And if you do have that space, are your employees aware of that? Are you promoting the awareness of that availability? There's so many things that we can actively do to create it. And I think I always overlook my experiences in that. I get part of the LGBT plus community, so I think the awareness, obviously, of the intersectionality for a gay man like me especially is really important, and recognizing the lack of provisions, especially if once you go to men, and obviously so all the intersectionality in the groups that we're talking about today, is the limited provisions and experience to address the experiences of victims and survivors who speak out. And so it's really to discuss all of them, and it's all about inclusivity when we talk about domestic abuse. That's how we really engage people. That affects everyone through their own experiences. And I think, I think from, the workplace is the largest conduit that we have in society to providing awareness and support to victims and survivors of domestic abuse. So there's so many more things that we can do. I think it's important to rally around the positives that we're doing, but what more we can do and what's realistic in the future. And it's all about shared learning and having environments like this that converse and discuss and move those conversations forward.
Yeah, definitely. And I like the idea of the notion of shared environments and just webinars like this that people can come on, listen to those conversations. And thank you for kind of that personal stance around your own experiences as a gay man, and just kind of bringing out that, you know, just the intersect there. So just thinking about the lack of provisions and, you know, having to say, look, I am the following, and this is the experiences that I have. That in itself, not people don't want to continuously repeat that in itself. So I'm going to think about some of the questions that are in the Q&A box, and I'm just going to direct it towards the speakers. Speakers, those on the panel, if you feel like you need to pass it on to anyone else, that's absolutely fine. Just don't pass it back to the chair, whatever you do. So the first question, I'm going to direct it towards Bridie, if that's okay. So one of the members on the group has asked, how does intersectionality differ from a traditional person-centered approach? It seems to assume that a person will have experienced certain disadvantages, which may well be the case, but not necessarily. How best to approach this without making prejudgments about a person? It's a really good question. So, Bridie, I'm going to just come to you, please.
Thanks, Meena. Yeah, it's a very, very good question. Because again, with that, what we don't want to do is make assumptions. Oh, you've got a disability, you must have been treated like crap, you must have experienced this, that, and the other, because again, that's just kind of like clumping. What we need to do is just understand the prevalence of that type of oppression and make sure the environment and the spaces that we're offering people or employees are places where that's understood. So I need to understand actually what is the experience of Sandra as a Black woman and a leader. Because if I am employing staff, I need to understand what some of her experiences are. Not to say that I'm going to go in with that mindset, like a restricted checklist, but just I have to educate myself, and I have to continually educate myself. It's never done. It's never a done job. It's the same with language, imagery. Like, you know, I'm learning about my training materials. Karen's put something really helpful in the chat around that. That in itself is really helpful, because you will have individuals sitting in training, in staff meetings, in briefings, looking and watching out. Is there a male victim presented in that? Is the poster for the support services, like David was talking about, is there a rainbow suggesting they're LGBT? Are they female only? Do they cater for males? Do they cater for people with children? All of these different elements we have to, one, understand, and then two, really kind of talk about. So yes, person-centered, everything starts there. But I think the difference with intersectionality is understanding the even generational trauma. Even if directly they haven't experienced it, there can be generational trauma linked to that identity that we have to have an education and awareness of. And it's something, like I say, I'm kind of constantly building, but I cannot recommend highly enough that cultural competence, awareness around disability, hidden disability. Mine's a hidden disability. If you were to see me, you would never know, never ever know that I had a disability. The way it impacts my life is significant. And I actually require not a mass amount when I do work for Meena. I'm not hugely, hopefully, onerous on your time, but they're very, very specific and what my needs are. Meena's created such a safe space for that. But I've had experience of employers or people I've worked with that haven't. When we then combine that with DA, we know that men and women who have a disability are twice as likely to be victims of domestic abuse. So not only do they have different complexities, maybe face depression and have other vulnerabilities potentially, they're also twice as likely to be victims of DA. So really, really important that whilst we're being person-centered, we understand actually the wider lens of what could some of their oppressions be, even if not direct, generationally or linked to people with disabilities. So, you know, I've very limited oppression linked to my disability because it's invisible. However, what I do have is the knowledge of how people with disabilities are seen, the eye rolls if you need to ask for stuff at work, or you're being extra, the fear I had at work that I'd be seen as less than because I was spending so much time away from my desk. So yeah, even internally, victim survivors with different kind of intersecting identities, even if they've not experienced it directly, will carry a lot. So being person-centered with an understanding of those intersecting identities, I think is the point there, that it's just like an additional layered approach.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Bridie, for that. I'm going to go to the last 3 questions in the chat, and then we're going to start thinking about wrapping up. The session is due to end at 2 o'clock. So, David, I'm going to come to you if that's okay. So one of the questions in the chat, and it's more of a national question because it's about the language that we use kind of within our systems. So it's about how do we provide that level of reassurance, whether you're a male victim, whether you're heterosexual, you're disabled, you're an ethnic minority, or you're a gay man of domestic abuse. When we think about equitable or equality in status, when nationally, sometimes we might see language, such things as crimes against women and girls, which we understand why it's there. And I'm thinking about the work that you do with the Domestic Abuse Commissioner as well, and you do a lot of national kind of work. Just any thoughts on that, David? How can we provide that level of reassurance, whether you're an employer, whether you're supporting a male victim or someone with those different identities as well? How do we provide that level of assurance?
I think it's always just coming back to being empathetic to everyone's experiences of domestic abuse. Everyone has a right to their own experiences, and it's the provisions that are needed, I think, that always need to get shouted about. And it's always a conversation about the lack of services, and obviously from intersectionality in the affected groups of there's a sincere lack of services, and especially obviously speaking about our male survivors, male refugees as well, and it's a conversation that needs to happen. I obviously can't speak for a government perspective, but I mean nationally the conversation has always been largely led on domestic abuse through violence against women and girls, which has historically been the greater reporting of victims of domestic abuse. But that I shouldn't undermine the experiences at a cost of male survivors of domestic abuse and other groups of migrant survivors of domestic abuse. There's currently no recourse to have any support whatsoever. So it's always a moving conversation that we have to keep pushing the language that all victims deserve support, and that's the provisions that need to be there. Certainly, I think you can talk more systemically to how domestic abuse is perpetrated mainly by men. And how it affects them, but it doesn't mean obviously that all male are perpetrators, and certainly male violence against women does hurt and detrimentally in effect do harm to men as well. I'm a child survivor of domestic abuse, and the perpetrator was a male, and I think it's really important to just recognise all the systemic issues of power and control behind these things, and look at the patterns of abuse and escalating acts, and how we can marry everyone's experiences up to their own not uniform, but own specific needs, because there is no one uniformed way to respond to everyone's experiences of domestic abuse. And I think that's the conversation that's definitely is happening right now, and the conversation will happen with the intersectionality of it. And it's just more, walking down the road of what we need to do. But that we're talking about is really important. I think it was a big worry when COVID hit. It was always up in the headlines, and that was great. It was amazing. There was always visibility to it. And I think it was a worry that it was going to drop off, and it hasn't dropped off. And it's still up there in the headlines, and we still need to keep shouting about it and awareness. So I think we're all getting included and plugged into the need of victims and survivors. So I don't think we should worry. I think there's a lot of promise, and that's what these conversations are about.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. And thank you so much for the comments that are coming in the chat. So, I'm just reading Karen's, Charlie's, April Dawn, the comments that are coming in. If you haven't seen what's been said in the chat around cultural competency, or thinking about services that are working with those that are blind or partially sighted, people are quoting research in the chat, please have a look, because it's also a really good opportunity to make new connections and to think actually what else is out there. The last question is going to come to Sandra, and then I'm actually going to answer a question that's in the chat as well. I know I said I wouldn't, but I feel like I want to now. So Sandra, just for the last kind of few minutes, how do we employers respond to domestic abuse in a way that is tailored towards that individual's intersecting needs, while recognizing that the drivers of domestic abuse and our experiences are often social. Really good point. So gender norms, racial discrimination. Therefore, organisations, how can they work at those multiple levels with individuals, communities and policies? So it's a bit of a two questions in one, but a really good question.
Yeah, and a very big question as well. Well, basically, not forgetting the things that we're probably taking for granted. There needs to be awareness. There needs to be training. There needs to be safe spaces so that as people go through that training, they may recognize, oh my gosh, I'm actually an abuser and I didn't see it from the. So what help and support is the organization giving to help that person deal with their own issues and move forward and change their behaviors? But also you then get with the awareness and the training, oh my gosh, I'm being abused. What support does the organization provide for that? So in addition to the obvious policies and procedures, the next stage is creating opportunities for support. And, you know, every organization's not going to have the finance or the people to be able to do that. So look outside and, you know, and work with other organizations and other support services and other individuals that can help you exactly where you and your employees need it. Do things like do surveys, gather data. Without data, you're not going to know how best to create the support within your organization and how best to train your managers. You've got the general level training, but then if you do your research within your organization, you may find that your managers and your leaders are bordering on issues of how they treat people inappropriately within the organization as well. So there's a whole lot of things that you can do. Some of the stuff is actually, you know, not expensive or actually free. If you talk to your people, you may find out that you've got people within your organizations, got the experience, have got, you know, the information that they can support you, but where they don't. And I've written down on my piece of paper, trust. As much as we within organizations want to do everything, the trust doesn't exist. And you've got to build up the trust by the policies, the procedures, the support spaces, and the support services. That is what builds up the trust over time. I talked about gathering data, doing survey. If you put data requests out there and your people don't respond, you have a trust issue. So it's about delving into the issues of that trust and working with your managers to change their mindset as well as their behaviors. And then you work with your external society, other organizations to share best practice, develop best practice, but also we talked about imagery and that sort of stuff. What does your organization stand for? What is your imagery saying? What's your language saying within your organization, but also externally? So there are lots of things that can be done, and there's a lot of support. Obviously, you know, EIDA is a huge wealth of support with their what's the book, the employee handbook that has just come out, which actually has so much information to get organizations on that road. And why this has come about is because there's so many organizations, both big and small, don't even know where to start. But there's lots of help. A lot of the panelists here can help, but that handbook is a huge starting point as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sandra. And the last question was around, do we worry that Kimberly Crenshaw's work will be forgotten? One of the individuals that was here today said, I was so happy to hear you reference her. I've been in spaces where she isn't even referenced when discussing the concept. So I'm going to answer this because I feel very passionate about intersectionality as a concept and the roots of intersectionality. Let's not forget, intersectionality came out in 1989. We've had it now for nearly 30 years. It is not a new concept, and I don't think it will ever be forgotten. I think sometimes what happens is it can be misinterpreted. So my advice to anyone here today who might go away and think, How do I teach my staff? How do I teach my employers? How do I embrace intersectionality? It's about embracing it within your company culture. Make sure you remember the roots. It sits within the Black feminist movement, and that's where it came from, and it will always be from that movement. The great thing about Kimberly Crenshaw is her work is universal. So she runs a number of podcasts. So all you have to do is Google her and you can sign up to her podcast. She has a website. She does loads of free literature out there. All of her books are out there to purchase or to kind of download. Her original paper from 1989 is available on the internet. Just go and have a read. And what I would say as your host is just embrace it, embrace intersectionality. It's a concept that we should be embedding within all company cultures. And actually, as a human being, I just embed it within my own humanistic approach to life as well. So I'm going to thank the panel. It's coming up to 1:58 and we're due to finish at 2. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes back, everybody. Jazz hands. 2 minutes back. Thank you so much all for coming. Thank you, David. Thank you, Bridie. Thank you, Sandra. I'm going to hand it back to Aisha. And thank you from myself. I've been Meena Kumari and I'm from HOPE Training. Thank you, everybody. Oh, Aisha, just unmute.
Sorry, thank you earlier. That was absolutely incredible. Thank you so much. I've taken so many notes and loads of information that I'm going to be going away and educating myself on. So thank you. One quote that I've just absolutely loved was, start with the individual and work outwards. So that's brilliant. Thank you to Meena, Sandra, David and Bridie for all your insights and for answering the questions and for joining us today. I'm really grateful to all of you for the session and for all the work that you do. And we'll be sharing the summary in our Tuesday trio next week, so please do look